Carlos Saldivia and also Jason Fitzgerald will be joining us here in mere moments. Todd and Rob to get it going here on a Saturday. And Robert, good morning.
Good morning. I hope everything's going good with you. I know you had a rough week, so hope everything's going good.
Yeah, it sounds like we'll be getting into that a little bit later once Carlos and Jason join us. But the big national news this week was the Democrats held their convention and made it official that Joe Biden will indeed be their presidential nominee, and Kamala Harris will be their vice presidential nominee. Kind of your broad stroke and general takeaways from the convention.
So first off, let me just say, far be it from me to defend the DNC very much, but it was very hard to watch. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that because of the virus, it had to be digital and everything like that. So, I think that I think you'll see some of that same stuff for the RNC where it just feels clunky and fake. I think that, that's a lot of it because of virus. But aside from that, I mean, the big takeaway to me is what they don't talk about. And so you never heard once about the riots. You didn't hear about fentanyl overdoses. It's all about dividing you based on race. And I think it's interesting. I remember writing back in 2016, the Democrats in the national media had this big narrative that the RNC was so dark and the DNC convention was bright and full of hope. Well, if you had to use one word to describe this convention, it would be dark. It was constantly people talking about how racist the country is, how unforgivable it is. And what was even worse than that was what you saw in primetime was one thing, but the people that got to speak at the convention during the day were people that said things like, you're racist if you want to stop illegal immigration, that we'll burn in hell for that we need to get rid of the police, that they were excited that there weren't many white people there and things like that. So, ultimately, Joe Biden to me is just a happy face that they're trying to put on to make it seem like, oh, we're moderate. They're not. They are the party of Kamala Harris. They are the party of racial division, of the riots, of hating the United States.
Rob, I took a takeaway on what you just said about how dark it was, just from a messaging standpoint. And one of the questions that I have I'd like to respond to is, if Joe Biden has been in public service and predominantly at the national and federal level for the better part of 5 decades, is he not, and by the way, in the White House for 8 years, is he not at some point responsible for all of the high offices that he's held, for part of the messaging that they have of all this systemic nonsense that they keep preaching to everybody that exists? If he's been in public life for the better part of 5 decades, you'd think that he's had, a hand in legislation, a hand in executive orders, a hand in driving the country. Is that a wrong takeaway of kind of that question?
No, I agree 100%. I ask this all the time. So let's take Joe Biden specifically. He's been in office for more than 4 decades. Their argument isn't, look, racism sometimes exists, which we all agree with, and we should do what we can to fight against it. And the argument's not that the government's perfect, or the government isn't perfect, and sometimes it has policies that have the opposite effect what was intended. They're making the argument that the very institutions of this country are systemically racist. Yet Joe Biden's been one of the chief people in charge of those institutions. You could look at this in a more specific way if you look at Black Lives Matter and this claim. So they talk about institutional racism of the police. They're not talking about federal law enforcement. They're talking about the police they deal with in their communities. So take a place like Minneapolis. Now, that's been governed by Democrats exclusively for over 5 decades. So if the police there are ran by Democrats and they're institutionally racist, why would we then elect Democrats in order to fight that? It's the same with Joe Biden. If the argument is we need a revolution, why are you supporting, because all of these institutions are racist, why are you supporting and voting for the candidate that not only is the embodiment of the institution, but is totally supported by everyone who controls those institutions and himself has controlled them for 40 years? It makes no sense, and it shows that either one, they're being disingenuous, which is what I believe, and that this is just a political move, is all it is about political power, or second, they're very, very ignorant. If you really think that supporting the candidate of Wall Street, supporting the candidate of the wealthy oligarchs in this country, supporting someone like Joe Biden, who has been in office for 40 years, and this is what he thinks of black people, they're not very diverse. If you don't vote for him, then you're not really black. That's what he thinks of the black community. He told you in his own words just in the past month. If you think that guy's going to be able to fight, quote, institutional racism, you have another thing coming.
Judicial Watch has just put out an article, I think it was the last couple of days, that they did some Freedom of Information Act requests, right to know type requests for the payroll records and payroll discrepancies when Kamala Harris was the district attorney out in San Francisco, California. I don't know if you've seen this article or not. It recently just broke. But what Judicial Watch found was that she was what appears to be, and again, it's a developing story, and I don't want to misspeak, but it appears as if she was doing some form of double dipping, right, from a payroll standpoint, and people were bringing that to light, and Judicial Watch apparently has come across this and begun to write about it. Do you find it concerning, that somebody that has a law enforcement background, a prosecutor background, is now just blanketly signing off on these protests, these riots, and that's okay just because it's for the cause?
Yeah, it absolutely is concerning. And look, one of the things with Kamala Harris is her background in law enforcement did not apply well to her base, to the Democratic base. So that's one of the reasons that she was just found unpalatable, because everyone who embraces this sort of defund the police mindset, they're not happy with Kamala Harris. But the irony is, she also isn't backed by the pro-police crowd because, like you said, stories like this, there are other stories that I read, for example, where she intentionally withheld evidence of innocent people. She went after the black community where she lived for marijuana laws while she joked on camera about smoking marijuana. She went after black parents for truancy or the crime of their kids not attending school. So she seems to be one of these prosecutors that, is all about making a point and being hard-nosed, but not in a good way, not community policing, not working with the community to do things well. So she's the worst of both worlds. Yet she's willing to flip at the switch of a hat and say, oh, all of a sudden now I'm against police. Now I'm against, the systemic racism of police. I mean, this is who Kamala Harris is. She is an empty slate. She'll say whatever she can to obtain power. And for goodness sakes, she literally came out in February and said that she thinks that Joe Biden is a serial sexual assaulter. She believes the litany of women that have accused Joe Biden, but now she supports Joe Biden without ever saying word one about these alleged victims. So yeah, it's disturbing, and you see this all over the country where Kamala Harris is now out of a position of being involved in law enforcement, but so many places we see people that are in charge of law enforcement, like Lori Lightfoot in Chicago, or we see prosecutors like, I forget her name, but the woman in Chicago as well that let Jussie Smollett off. And, far be it from me to talk about conspiracies, but we know that George Soros Open Society Foundation instills and finances these prosecutors so that they could leave criminals out and make sure that they don't face justice. Kamala Harris is another example of that. She's supposed to be someone who understands law and order, took an oath to protect society, yet not only did she, but not one time in her convention did I hear her talk about the widespread riots across this country.
Kim Fox, I think, was the name you're looking for.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, the special counsel that was looking into her handling of the Juicy Smollett, as Dave Chappelle likes to put it, that particular case, found that she did indeed mishandle that case, but quote unquote, there was nothing criminal. We'll let other folks decide that, but in my humble opinion, that was a political finding, if you will, that there was nothing criminal that occurred. Because there's enough going on in Chicago on a daily and a weekly basis. They just didn't need more violence on the street if they would have indeed found that not only did she mishandle it, but it was a criminal act.
Well, and to bring this back to this Judicial Watch story, which admittedly I haven't read, is anyone out there under the disillusion that Kamala Harris will face actual, serious scrutiny for this? Both in the media and with law enforcement. I mean, look, it's quite evident. This week we have the story of Steve Bannon being arrested. Look, I don't know. Maybe Steve Bannon defrauded people. Maybe he didn't. But I know this. If you're in Washington, the only chance you have of facing justice from the criminal justice system is if you're a Trump supporter. That's it. If you're Hillary Clinton and you're the Clintons and you're doing all the shady stuff with the Clinton Foundation, doesn't matter. If you're the Podestas and you're failing to register as a foreign lobbyist and you're working with the exact same people as Trump's guy, Manafort goes to jail for that. The Podestas get to retroactively sign paperwork. So the lesson learned is this, that when you're a Democrat, when you're someone that's with this establishment, you could break any law you want. It doesn't matter. You could riot, you could burn buildings down, you could embezzle money, you could double dip like allegedly Kamala Harris did. It doesn't matter. You will not face the criminal justice system. But if you say one word about Trump being a good president, they'll go through everything in your life with a fine-tooth comb. They'll Roger Stone you. They'll call CNN and then come with like 15 people with AR-15s, drag you out of bed in your underwear so that CNN can film it. All for the crime of what? Allegedly misleading investigators, something that we know that Brennan, Clapper, Comey, all of them do. So, yeah, I've no doubt that Kamala Harris probably engaged in all sorts of shady practices, but I won't hold my breath for her to face justice.
Let me just give you an example. I'm going to speak broadly and generally, to keep confidences, but there are folks that are in my circle, okay, that I have relationship with that do business domestically and internationally, right?
Yep.
And these are folks that dot all the I's, cross all the T's, and then out of the blue, they get this letter and say, well, wait a minute, you're doing certain business with certain entities overseas, and we were unaware of that. So you need to come see us and fill out additional paperwork and this and that, right? No intentionality, no criminality involved, just making sure that they dot I's and cross T's. And these are folks, okay, Rob, that they have means to do whatever they need to do whenever they need to do it from, a business standpoint. And they're being harangued because, well, you may have this name or you may have that name. And I'm sitting there going, there's no intentionality, right, to what they're doing to potentially break the law. However, there's all these other forms that you have to go fill out, which, of course, they do with legal counsel and go, have we complied with everything you've asked us to comply with? Because we're not trying to do anything inappropriate.
Well, and look, this double-tiered justice system, the two-tiered justice system, this doesn't just affect us nationally. You might say, oh, well, cases like Kamala Harris or Steve Bannon or people associated with Trump. This could also happen at the local level. I mean, I don't know if you knew this, Todd, but it's possible that, if you want to expose corruption of local officials, sometimes they could be vindictive and they could come after you with a bunch of BS claims to try to tie you up in the legal system. That happens even at the local level. I don't know if you were aware of that, Todd. That could happen.
Yeah, no question. And, one of our very special guests, I believe, has now joined us on our call. And if we can do an audio and or video check with none other than Jason Fitzgerald. Jason, Todd, and Rob here with you. How's your Saturday going so far?
Gentlemen, how are you? I'll bring the video in a moment, but I don't want to startle everybody right off the bat like this. I'm sorry about the delay, gentlemen.
No problem.
Well, maybe I'll tell you what. Maybe you're a Pittsburgh City School Board member, because I don't know if you saw that story earlier in the weekend in the Trib, but as they're having a Zoom meeting, one of the female board members decided it was the perfect time to get her day started. She disrobes on camera and steps in the shower.
Oh.
Of all the times to do that, not going to the meetings, not the time to do that. I'm sorry.
I can assure you I won't be doing that.
I think Rob and I agree. We appreciate that.
Thank
right,
you. Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah.
So Fitzy, where we are to this point is we're just kind of kicking around the idea of the DNC having their convention this past week, and kind of the general takeaways from that. And where I wanted to go, we were just talking about Kamala Harris and kind of her platform and the one vice presidential debate they'll have. They're talking about 3 presidential debates they're coming up. Before we talk about what's coming up this week with the Republican National Convention, just your general takeaways of the DNC and the convention.
Sure, and I'd like to just talk about the election generally. I mean, every 4 years you hear everybody say this is the most important election in our lifetime. This actually is, because throughout the course of my life, the Republican and Democratic nominees for president were virtually identical. We would often have choices of pale pastels instead of bold colors. And there has never, in my opinion, been a more important election, probably in the history of this country. particularly for working men and women. We have had, it takes about 50 years to destroy a republic. And the 50 years prior to 2016, we have done everything in our power to ship our jobs overseas, ship our wealth overseas. And the Democratic nominee for president has been an acolyte for those policies. He has voted for every lousy trade deal that has come down the pike. And now he's trying to say that he's an advocate for working people. The policies that he supported, that he was the critical vote in NAFTA, World Trade Organization, China's entrance into the WTO. This guy is the worst possible candidate for working people that has ever been put forward by either major political party, and his election would be devastating. I represent two companies that if Joe Biden is sworn in as president in January of next year, they'll both go out of business. They're 100% reliant upon the tariffs that the Trump administration negotiated relative to steel. So if you're a working person in this country, I don't think that there has ever been a more important election than this one. And I mean, what I saw at the convention was, I listened to Vice President Biden's speech, where he said we're all going to be united going forward, whatever. We'll all be united going forward with no jobs. And I think that this is we have a clear choice between pro-American policies that move America forward, or more of the same, Obama, Bush, Clinton politics of shipping our jobs and wealth and power overseas. So I obviously I've seen the media reports and, them saying what a stellar job the vice president did and what a trailblazer Kamala Harris is for basically doing what every career politician does in moving forward. But count me as not that impressed.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like to take it a step further, what you're saying is, can we all agree? There are people, I remember growing up, one of the things that I thought was strange was like advertisement. Why are these soda, companies paying celebrities so much to endorse their product? Well, the reason is it works. And people that spend large sums of money, they don't do so flippantly. They're doing so because they know that they'll get a return on their investment, particularly when you're talking about the wealthy of Americans. I don't understand, to speak to our Democrat friends out there that normally vote Democrat, particularly if you're like a pro-union person, a worker. Do you really think that voting for Joe Biden, that's embraced by all of these corporations that have outsourced your jobs to places like China for years and years, do you think that all of a sudden by voting for Joe Biden, it's going to help the American worker? When we could see universally almost the people that have been most responsible, including Biden himself, for outsourcing this work, for devastating the American worker, support the Democratic Party. Like, that's something that I wonder about, Jason. Where does that, even if you don't like Trump, if you're a union member, if you're a hardworking person that cares about workers and you're a Democrat, how could you possibly vote for Joe Biden in this party?
I don't see how any working person could in good conscience cast a vote for Joe Biden. I mean, what you're essentially doing is you're returning to the trade policies that have put this country in a position where we have shipped all of our good paying jobs overseas. And what we've been left with here is the opioid crisis with crime in our streets. And those things occurred and happened because of the loss of wealth in this country and the destruction of the middle class. And Joe Biden has been a foot soldier in the destruction of the middle class ever since he's been elected. So he can talk about he's this scrappy kid from Scranton, he's fighting for working people. I would ask any of our Democratic friends to tell me one instance in the 47-year career of Joe Biden where he has stood up to corporations and stood up for regular working people. One instance. I don't think they can name it. Every single vote that he's cast on a trade deal, and again, he's been the deciding vote on a couple of these things, and he really pushed President Obama to put TPP forward, which thankfully 2016 was destroyed when Donald Trump became elected. Hillary Clinton was going to sign it. TPP would have completely destroyed the farmer. I mean, we're talking about the impacts of that the trade situations had on agriculture. If TPP was signed, American agriculture would be totally dead, and the rest of the jobs that are still here would have went overseas. So I don't understand how anybody who cares about working people or who is a working person can support somebody who's had 47 years of getting it wrong every single time. He doesn't have a mixed record on trade. He has one of the worst records on trade. And ask Bernie Sanders.
Yep.
You know, Bernie Sanders is the one. I'm not the first person who said this. Bernie Sanders said it first. And for you know, folks who care about working people, I think it's a pretty simple choice. You don't have to like Donald Trump. You don't have to respect him. But the choice in November is clear. We either bring our jobs back, secure our borders, secure our wealth, or we continue the destruction of our country. It's as simple as that.
Jason, if I may, some of the messaging that former Vice President Biden was using in his speech was the fact that the current president has not kept this country safe. And of course, he was referring to the coronavirus. If I may postulate an argument on Mr. Biden's resume, just for folks to consider. This is the same individual that when the attack on the consulate in Benghazi happened, was a party to an administration that sent exactly no help to Americans in distress and in harm's way, protecting not just regular Americans. And again, please don't take this the wrong way, but they had an ambassador under siege in a consulate, and they sent exactly zero help. If you'd like to see as close to what the actual events were in the Benghazi situation, the movie 13 Hours is about as close to reality as you can get. That said, this is the same vice president who advised his boss when the UBL raid, Osama bin Laden raid, was talked about, and then they put it to an administration vote, if you will, or straw poll. Former Vice President Biden was the one that said, well, we shouldn't go. So here's my question and part of my argument. If you're going to argue, Vice President Biden, if you're going to argue that the current guy in the White House is not keeping this country safe, those are two glaring instances where you had every opportunity to protect your fellow Americans, and the record is clear, you didn't. First to you, Jason, then to you, Rob.
Well, I think that's just another example. And I would argue, too, that and again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but this is something I've been talking about and fighting for over 20 years. You know, what about the health and the safety of people in these communities who have lost their jobs? And now we have generations of people who are dependent upon drugs. You know, you have suicide, rates in rural areas and in industrial areas going through the roof. I would argue that he's never been there for us in anything. So, yeah, I mean, obviously the situation there in Benghazi was extraordinarily disturbing. I think it was an example of weak and arrogant leadership. But, you know, yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I would ask my friends who are supporting Joe Biden to name one occasion where he's done something where he stood against the grain and fought for regular people, or stood up to protect anybody or to help anybody. He's had a very long career. I don't know how anybody can be in a career that long. He's accomplished a lot. He's created a lot of jobs everywhere but the United States. And he's been a very accomplished man at doing a lot of things for the rest of the world and doing nothing for us. So, yeah, for him, I understand that, you know, the concerns relative to COVID-19, and I'm kind of a centrist on that issue, if it's even a right-left issue.
Right.
But I think that the long-term threats to our future generations are much more serious on an economic front, because it's not just an economic issue. You know, when people don't have work, it's it's health and welfare and other things. But yeah, you know, I obviously was not particularly fond of his decisions on foreign policy either. Rob's more of a foreign policy expert than I am, though.
I don't know if expert's the right word. Yeah. So let me just bring this to you, Jason. We were at an event, the Rally on the Rock here last weekend, where General Spalding gave a fantastic speech on our number one geopolitical threat being China. Now, do we really think that Joe Biden or the Democratic Party as a whole is going to stand up to China? Well, let's look at the details. Supported the TPP and free trade policies that enrich China, outsourced our work to the Chinese government, has never done it, even in their speech. Did you hear anything at the DNC convention critical of China? Instead, when China either manufactured COVID in a lab, or I don't even have to prove that, I could prove that they intentionally misled the world about the dangers of COVID, that was directly from China. When Trump sought to, in early as February, to actually restrict travel from China, Joe Biden and his cohorts called Trump a racist. Then they point to countries like New Zealand and say, we should have did what New Zealand did. You know what the first thing New Zealand did was? Restricted travel from places like China. So on one hand, they seem to buddy up to China. Then we could go with example after example. The Democrats continually talk about Russians under every bed. Look, it's a sad reality that Russia is no longer the geopolitical threat to us that it once was during the Cold War. Doesn't mean that they can't be. Doesn't mean that they're not to be taken serious. But their economy's in the dumps. Their military's in the dumps. China, however, is a burgeoning adversary to us. And yet it seems like they are completely intertwined in so many of our institutions, especially the Democratic Party. So, for example, remember when we had all of these investigations into Donald Trump because supposedly Russian spies were infiltrating his campaign? Yet at the same time, it turns out that it was, what was the name? What senator was it that we found out that Feinstein, that she had a Chinese spy as her driver for over 10 years. And then we could see during this time, Joe Biden's particularly, but also the Democrats in general, have issued policy after policy that have been pro-China in interest and in effect. And then the icing on the cake is, if Joe Biden understands like the important threats and foreign policy, why oh why was his son engaged in a $1.1 billion energy deal with the communist Chinese government? Do we really trust someone? Now, we saw how Joe Biden treated this situation when it was Ukraine. Ukraine is small potatoes. When Joe Biden's son was engaged in corruption and getting kickbacks from an energy company in the Ukraine, Joe Biden went all out, guns a-blazing, and the Democrats decided to impeach Trump over that because heaven forbid we actually look at the crimes of the Democrats that they legitimately commit. Do we really think that Joe Biden's going to get into office and say, yes, China's our biggest rival, and yes, they gave my son $1.1 billion, but yeah, I'm going to take it serious. I'm going to do something about it. It is clear that this is part of the globalist agenda from the establishment. And there are Republicans in the same boat, your Romneys, your Rubios, and people like that. But it's clear, like you said before, the pastels that we get. This has been the agenda in the United States for 50 years. Politicians in our country have sold out normal Americans. I don't care your color. I don't care your religious background. I don't care your sexual orientation. Your government, by and large, hasn't cared about you. And they, your politicians, a bunch of business owners in this country, and foreign governments have got enriched off of the labor of American citizens. Joe Biden is the avatar of that. And we'll make sure that not only are we not safe foreign policy-wise, and we'll see all sorts of devastation from terrorists. Here's the other thing. If you're my friends on the left, I remember when I marched with you against the Iraq war. You gonna vote for Joe Biden? Joe Biden's been a hawk on every single war that was unjustified. When it comes to something like Todd said of taking out bin Laden, he was against that. But, you know, every other conflict, oh, he's totally for. Joe Biden and the Democrats are foaming at the mouth that Trump wants to try to pull troops from a disastrous 20-year war we've had in Afghanistan. So the people that lecture you and tell you, oh, Trump's a xenophobe, they're the ones that are driving us towards a conflict with nuclear-armed Russia. They're the ones that are allowing our real adversary, China, to eat our lunch and to commit all sorts of crimes, including involving this COVID. And they are the ones that, you know, were with Obama when it came to Libya, which caused Benghazi. They're with him when it came to Yemen. They're with him when it came to Iraq, when it came to Afghanistan, and all of these other disastrous foreign policies. So foreign policy-wise and economically, Joe Biden is about the worst person we can have because he is just an empty suit for the establishment Democratic Party.
I agree, Robin. The other thing is, too, is I am very concerned about, and always have been, about outside interferences into American elections. Obviously, the Russians do it. The Chinese have been doing it. You know, they've done it. They've done a lot of that. And I think that China is the single biggest threat to the United States. And the interesting thing is, I was having a discussion with somebody about this, and they said, well, you know, militarily, they're not that strong or whatever, although General Spalding and others have told me that that's not true. The problem is that China doesn't need to fire a single shot to destroy the United States. All they have to do is take our wealth, you know, and take our jobs. They want a United States that's broke, and we're getting there, quite frankly. And it has been leadership in both parties. I mean, George H.W. Bush, the former ambassador to China, when he was president, he certainly, I'm sorry, John's in the background there, he certainly was very supportive of policies that strengthened China and hurt the United States. It's surprising to me that this election is even close.
Yep.
Can I postulate a theory? I don't believe that it is that close.
I don't either.
Yeah.
But I think that we're being gaslit because, look, I'm cynical. I truly believe that they're going to engage in election fraud. Now, why would I believe that? Well, let's see what they've done here recently. They're actively encouraging people to burn down our cities and causing racial division, and they're covering up for that. They're going against potential drugs that could save lives like hydrochloroquine. I'm not making a statement on whether or not hydrochloroquine could work. I have no idea. I'm not a doctor. But I do know when many doctors have came out and said it's possible, and without any medical knowledge whatsoever, the entire Democratic Party was against it just because Trump mentioned it by name. They've actively subverted, put people with, we've seen Democratic governors actively put COVID patients in nursing homes, which are the most vulnerable populations. And then regardless if you think that was accidental or just corruption, they then pointed to those deaths as a reason to further lock down us and the healthy population of our rights and our economy. So do we really believe for a second that they're beyond cheating during the election? So part of me wonders, does it even matter? If I think you're right, Todd. I think that Trump probably is winning hands down, but we'll see what happens. Never underestimate the corruption of the establishment.
Can I tell you that my concern, more so than a concern with the Democrats, is the concern of Republicans. And I have always been an economic nationalist, and I've found a home in the Republican Party. But I'll tell you, when you look at the establishment of the Republican Party, they don't want this guy to win because they want to go back to the way that they were doing things. And you had said, was there any mention of China at the convention? John Kasich mentioned China when he said they're not our enemy.
Yeah.
And here's a guy who was one of the key architects of the NAFTA deal, which has cost millions of Americans their jobs. And he's somebody who very much consistent with a lot of folks in the establishment. He says that he stands for law enforcement. Did you ever see when he was pulled over by a police officer, he calls a police officer an idiot because these people are elitist. They believe that there's one set of rules for them and there's one set of rules for the regular people. And, as far as him, the biggest positive thing that I can say that's happened to the Republican Party is that we've gotten rid of John Kasich because, he's a guy who is supported, just like Joe Biden, you did it for a shorter period of time. But this guy teamed up with the Democrats and others and has been one of the architects in destroying the American economy. So I do say that one time that I did hear China mentioned was when Mr. Kasich said that they're not our enemies. And, that's probably why he wants to send all of our jobs there. He wants to help them out.
If former Governor Kasich and I could have 10 minutes together in an interview, I think his political career would be over in those 10 minutes because I have such a personal story related to him and his policies of that caused unintended consequences, that his political career would be over within 10 minutes. So yes, you're more than welcome to leave political office, former Governor Kasich. Stick to TV would be my advice. But who's listening to me anyway? I'm just a knucklehead on Zoom. That said, as we pivot from the DNC this past week, now looking forward to the RNC, they put out the list of some of their speakers that they're going to have. And one name that jumped off the page at me, actually two of them, Abby Johnson, who is part of the movie Unplanned. She's the focus of that movie and that story. And Carlos can speak volumes about how that film was put together. But she used to work for Planned Parenthood and basically turned into a whistleblower on Planned Parenthood. And secondly, Nick Sandmann is going to be a speaker at the RNC. First to you, Jason, then to you, Rob. With Nick Sandmann now as a speaker for treatment by the media, which we can talk about this later on with another story, but with Nick Sandmann and then Abby Johnson on the speakers list for the RNC, I mean, that's two heavy hitters before you ever get to an elected official.
I'd like to throw that over to Rob for him to start on that one.
Yeah. So with Nick particularly, let's just go through what the Nick Sandmann story is. Not only does it show corruption of our media, but this shows what critical race theory and the ideas of white privilege, this shows where it actually leads. If I were to tell you 4 years ago that we would see adult racists yelling homophobic and racist slurs at kids, and that the national media would decide to defend the adult racist in attacking the kids, doxing the kids, saying the kids had punchable faces, even after they knew the kids' school had to be closed down for credible bomb threats and that the kids were getting death threats, you'd have said I was insane. That couldn't happen. That's literally what happened. We had adult black racists from the Black Hebrew Israelites attacking these kids, shouting homophobic and racial slurs. We had an American Indian, Nathan Phillips, whose friend went with him and approached these kids in their face and then lied about it. And his friend yelled at the kids to go back to their countries and other racial slurs such as that. That Nathan Phillips also said that those black adult racists were yelling, and I quote, harsh truths at those kids. Yes, that's right. If you hear adult racists yelling at kids and you think that that's just harsh truths, you might be a racist. But the media decided to back them. Why? Because that's what this leads to. Your hatred for Trump and your hatred for Republicans in general, and this idea of white privilege and white guilt and all this crap means that that's perfectly fine. You could ruin a child's life. They wouldn't have cared if Nick Sandmann would have been killed. They would have publicly said, oh, this was terrible. It was a terrible tragedy. That shouldn't have happened. But in their deep, dark places of their soul, they don't care. They know that when they report these stories, they knew that their reporting was implicitly directing violence at Nick Sandmann, and they didn't care. And when they got caught with their hand in the cookie jar because someone actually had film of the whole incident, what did they do? Did they apologize and say, my goodness, that was terrible? They gave a fake apology, and then they started to look at Nick Sandmann's school 5 years before he was at the school. And they said, oh, look, here was a basketball game. They called it a blackout game. And one of the kids painted himself black, with the school colors. That must prove that he's racist. What is the newsworthiness of that story? You just reported something that endangered a kid's lives while you defended adult black racists. And instead of saying, my goodness, this needs to be a wake-up call, you sent your researchers out to try to find stuff that occurred at the school 5 years ago. Now, the fact that the media is so incredibly biased in this way, and this sort of racism is so strong when it comes to the establishment Democratic Party, is shocking. Nick Sandmann is not only is he a voice that needs to be heard, but he's someone that's incredibly brave, and my heart goes out to. I think that what he represents is what the future holds for all of you. Now, I know that there's a bunch of my left-leaning friends that say, oh, yeah, but not me. I'm a good person. I'm not someone that they'll ever target. Every single one of us, regardless of how much you think you're an ally of that side, can in an instant do something like smirk. You smirk like that? Oh, guess what? That's a racist smirk. Now you need to be taken down. And the fact that the media, whose job it is to actually look into these stories and to, why is this even a noteworthy story in the first place? Can and Hinton, a 5-year-old white kid gets killed. They can't be bothered to cover that. But a white kid smirking at adult black racist, oh yes, that's one of the biggest stories in the country for the year. We need to start standing up to this and stop the evils and the horrible nature of the mainstream media and how they could skew things and attack people and take down anyone through intimidation, through smearing, through doxing, through cancel culture, anyone that seeks to go against them. If we don't fight back against this, and if we don't listen to people like Nick Sandmann, then this will be us in the future where there is effectively no free speech, no public adoration. You can't go in public and do anything, because if you do, anytime the mob decides that you need to be canceled with physical violence or just deplatforming, you will be.
Right. And call me old-fashioned, but I support a First Amendment that protects my right to free speech and people who disagree with me 100%. And what I think is concerning is that with regards to the left, they believe in free speech so long as it's free speech that agrees with them. I think that there's a healthy dialogue that needs to happen. And that the First Amendment should apply to both people. I'm very happy for Mr. Sandmann's victory in court or settlement there. And I think that it was unfortunate the way that he was piled onto. And I think that the thing that concerns me is, so we have a convention next week. I guess we don't really know exactly. I don't know exactly how it's going to work. It's going to be remote or whatever. But I hope that people watch these speakers and listen to their words and not listen to the interpretation of their words afterwards.
Right. And that's just it. I mean, again, I'll be honest with you. As someone who is a fan of speaking, I got a speech communication degree. I can admit when people I disagree with have a good speech. I think Michelle Obama, particularly in 2016, I thought her speech was phenomenal. Her speech this time was okay. Joe Biden's speech was okay. Now, that doesn't mean you have to agree with it to say that they're okay. But the adulation that was heaped on them by the media is just, if you watch those speeches, just from a purely was it a good speech standpoint, they acted like these were the greatest speeches ever in existence. Oh my goodness, the greatest day for Joe Biden ever. Van Jones let the cat out of the bag on CNN. He actually said, the expectations for Biden were so low, as long as he didn't come out and stumble on stage, we would say it's the greatest speech ever. But it is the greatest speech ever. That's how Van Jones put it. If they were that hyperbolic about how awesome the DNC speeches are, it will be that and more the opposite direction towards everything in the RNC. They'll praise solid reporters doing interviews with Joe Biden, like Cardi B. Go ahead and look up some Cardi B videos on YouTube to see the caliber of her as a person, who bragged about drugging and raping men. Yeah, that Cardi B that's interviewing Joe Biden, they'll brag about her as a fantastic guest, but they won't wait to be able to denigrate anyone that speaks in the RNC and pick it apart about how horrible the speech was and things like that. So yeah, watch them for yourselves. Don't even listen to us. Watch this stuff for yourself and make your own mind up, because people are going to spin it, to whatever they want.
And I agree with you, Robert, as I often do. I mean, yeah, Joe Biden's speech was, from a purely, and you're an articulate guy, and your background is, in debate and in communication. Yeah, he communicated a message, but when you balance that against the inconsistency, actually the consistency in his career of being consistently on the wrong side of everything, it just doesn't add up. So yeah, if it was a different guy who didn't have that record giving that speech, I'd say, yeah, the Democratic nominee speech is all right. But it certainly was not anything exceptional.
Right. And look at how, the dishonesty. I mean, Scott Adams, I'm a fan of Scott Adams. He writes the Dilbert comic strip. He has a Periscope. He calls this, and I agree with him, the building block of Joe Biden's campaign is based on one of the most hurtful lies and damaging lies in the history of this country politically. And that is that Donald Trump called neo-Nazis good people. He did not. He gave 3 speeches after Charlottesville. In all 3 speeches, he directly said 3 times, in all 3 speeches, I'm not talking about neo-Nazis. The second speech, he directly condemned the KKK, neo-Nazis, etc. He said there were people on both sides that were good and people on both sides that were bad, which is a true statement. Even if you would disagree with that, then he had a misjudgment of who was there. But when he specifically says, I'm not talking about neo-Nazis or white supremacists, they're terrible people, Joe Biden has taken that as the cornerstone of his campaign. That was the central talking point in his speech. And what that does is, because we have had this debate that's gone on for 4 years that I fought so vigorously against, is it okay to punch a Nazi? No, it's not okay. And do you want to know why? Because you'll then just call anyone you disagree with a Nazi. Now you've given the justification for political violence. Hence what we see all around the country right now. It's okay to burn down buildings and police precincts and punch shop owners. Why? Well, because of racism. Because, they must be bad people. And so what Joe Biden's doing is gaslighting people that, if you vote for Donald Trump, you're voting for a Nazi supporter, so you must be a Nazi supporter. So technically, as a speech, yeah, it was an okay speech. But when you look at the details, it was one of the most damaging speeches in the history of this country. And it's based on a lie, and it's going to further the violence that we see in the street and the political unrest and further the racial divide in this country.
Absolutely. If you've seen the Morning Call's recent poll, again, not a conservative poll or a conservative publication, and you look at where Donald Trump's strength is, it's in Joe Biden's supposed backyard, Northeast Pennsylvania. Donald Trump's polling around 63%. In Biden's at 25% in Northeast Pennsylvania. I don't see how we lose Pennsylvania. I mean, in 2016, we were 1.1 million registered Democrats. Over the Republicans were what now, Rob? Around 700,000.
Yep.
And I represent the borough of Ashley. There are 7 Democratic council people in the borough of Ashley. All 7 of them are supporting Donald Trump for president. And it's on these issues, these blue collar issues. And I really think, and this is why I really like, Rob, what you do, because there has not been since 2016, a major political party that I believe was the home for working people. I think that today, because of Donald Trump, the Republican Party is clearly the home for working people. Standing up against the elites and standing up for what everyday American values are, which are not held in high regard by the media. You're attacked as being a racist and a bigot or whatever else, but it has been the one thing that is colorblind is economic prosperity, because it's green. It's about money. It doesn't matter if you're white, black, or whatever. And truly, that's what our movement is about. Our movement is about true equality of opportunity for everybody. And I've never seen a clearer case. And I've studied history. As I said, I'm not a Republican first. I'm an American nationalist first. And I have never felt more at home in the Republican Party than I have in the last 4 years.
I completely agree. And look, here's what, if you had to say, what is the Democratic Party at this point with its leadership versus the Republican Party? I agree with you. Now, there are plenty of Republicans that I think are not doing a good job, but in general, it is the party for speaking up for working class people and at least attempting to care about us all based on our actions. The Democratic Party, quite simply, is the party of focusing on your race. That's what it is. Divide you by a mutable characteristic. You are not an individual. You are your race, or you are your gender, or rather you're a combination of all of those things. And so you have to ask yourself, have ever once, I know you two, I know Carlos, I know many other great conservatives. Never once have I seen any of them that are concerned about economic prosperity say, oh, but only for people that share my religious values, or share my skin color, or share my gender. That's the other side. We're the party that focuses on the content of your character. They're the party that focuses on the color of your skin. I seem to recall someone saying it would be better to focus on the content of the character. And just to give an example of this, look, COVID's difficult, and I understand we talk about it a lot here, and there were no easy decisions. But I read at one point about a month ago that something like 50% of all black business owners stood to lose their job because of the lockdowns as a result of COVID. Now, that's a serious thing. That economic prosperity lifts all ships, but economic decline also sinks all ships. And so if we're actually talking about things to help inner city communities, black communities, people of color, and things like that, regardless of what you think about Donald Trump, there was more economic prosperity occurring in those communities before COVID under Trump than there was under Obama. So I don't understand when you ask people like, what is it about Trump that racially that you hate about him so much? What is it? And they'll be like, he mean tweets and he doesn't seem likable and this and that. Who cares? Like, even if all that's true, he was someone that through his economic policies, he was standing up for the American worker of all people, of all colors. And that was helping people, employment for women was through the roof, better than it's ever been. Employment for Hispanic Americans was doing almost as good as it's ever been. Employment for black Americans. Does that mean that we don't have work to do? Of course, we always have work to do. I would like to see a country where working class Americans are thriving, and we could always do better. But I don't understand where this animosity comes that somehow we're going to, vote against Trump because, he's Hitler, he's racist, everyone that supports him is racist, and instead vote for the Democrats that, they'll talk about people of color every 4 years and then do nothing to help the community. But 4 years from now, trust them, they'll be out there pandering to you again to talk about how they really care about your economic prosperity.
Well, and you look at, there was a major financial institution who will remain nameless because I don't really need a lawsuit. I don't have as deep pockets as they do, but they donated $1 billion over 10 years to Black Lives Matter and causes related to that. What they really could do, instead of virtue signaling, is they could, I would love to know from this financial institution, what percentage of their portfolio is invested in inner city communities. Why don't they open up the opportunity for African Americans to get loans and to build businesses and to create jobs instead of simply giving money to what I believe is a terrorist group? Why aren't we doing that? If you really, these elites in Wall Street, et cetera, if they really want to help the African American community, let's loosen up credit in those communities. Let's invest in those communities and invest in those business people, because, and the Democratic Party is afraid of this because a prosperous, African American community doesn't need to be focused on, public assistance, and we shouldn't be judging our country's success by how many people are on public assistance. We should be judging it on how many people get out of that situation. And, I'd really like to see these people begin to put their money where their mouth is. And and you never hear, I have not heard any kind of plans of how the Democratic ticket is planning on helping minority communities grow economically. Unless I missed it somewhere, I haven't heard that.
Well, and this is just it. And like, Todd, we'll get you in and see what you think about this. You might disagree with me. Like, there could be someone out there that's on the left that says, hey, Rob, your potential plans for what would help the inner city, I disagree with. That's fine. And that's what politics is. And we can have reasonable discussions about what would be best for all communities, including those specific communities. But this idea that somehow you're immoral if you disagree with the Democratic position that even groups that I think are radical, like Black Lives Matter, like a terrorist group, like you said, even they agree, oh, it's institutional racism in cities that have been ran by Democrats for over 50 years. So if the institutions are racist, why am I all of a sudden shunned for disagreeing with the people that run those institutions? So if you want to have a discussion on who has the better idea of what could help those communities, no problem. That's a great discussion. We should have that. But this idea that, oh, you're racist if you disagree with us. You're immoral if you disagree with us. You don't care about these communities if you don't agree with our solutions. No, I think your solutions are terrible for the Black community. I think we've tried it your way for 50 plus years, and it's making things worse all the time. And just to give you an example of just kind of how this kind of insane argument goes, one of the things we can see that's a huge problem in the inner city Black communities in particular is lack of education opportunities. And it's something that I think the Republicans need to do a better job of focusing on. And so what we can see is one of the greatest tools we have to fight the deplorable conditions in inner city schools are charter schools. Yet the teachers unions and the Democrats are completely against these charter schools. Why is it that if you're in a teachers union or if you're some, white liberal living in suburbia, you say, I should have the right to send my child to whatever school I want, but you don't give that right to Black parents in inner city? Why is that?
Exactly. Exactly. And if you want to look at one area where African-American communities are held back and are held behind, it's with regards to education. If you live in the suburbs, in a wealthy suburb, you have the opportunity to send your children to the best schools, whereas inner city folks do not have that same opportunity. They're forced to send their kids to schools that are subpar academically, that are dangerous, and that's not fair. I just think of all of the African-American kids who are in those schools, people who could end up being our doctors and our thought leaders and our business leaders that are held back because they don't have access to quality education and a safe place to go to school. And I think that for the Democratic Party to not support, even if we simply say that it's going to be in certain areas, charter school opportunities for those people to be able to have their children. One of the greatest things that my father and mother gave to me was the opportunity at a good education. And folks in minority communities are held back by poor schools. And so school choice is an issue that I feel very strongly about, because if you want to get people out of poverty, the best way that we have seen to get people out of poverty is through educational opportunities. And to me, it's reprehensible that a Black child, as President Kennedy said in his civil rights speech a couple of weeks before he was assassinated, we have got to go into these communities and offer people opportunities at education. We have to give them opportunities to start and grow businesses. And that's where the public policy focus needs to be on these communities, is on getting, I don't just want to see white communities succeed. I want to see I want to see our country. And I also want to stop having a white community, a Black community, a Hispanic. We're all one country. We're all one nation. And we want to see, and conservative nationalists like us on this program today want to see that opportunity expand throughout the country. And we want to give opportunities in education and opportunities at wage growth to everybody. Yep. Everybody, regardless of skin color.
Todd, do you think that Governor Wolf shares the dream of wanting to have one united country, or like one Pennsylvania? Or do you think maybe he thinks there's two Pennsylvanias?
Rob, he told me directly when I asked him about the conversation about race, that there are definitely two Pennsylvanias. One if you are a minority and one if you're not. Again, I'm paraphrasing what he said, but it one if you're minority, one if you're not. And I thought it was really disingenuous of somebody that I'm trying to build a relationship with, to get facts out to Pennsylvanians. And I've asked him some very innocuous questions. For those of you that don't know, you might want to go look that up. And he's given just some amazing answers. I mean, that was one of them, the masking and unmasking and back to masking question, violation of his own orders. He admitted he was inconsistent, with going against his own orders to march in a protest because he thought it was worthwhile. And then we look yesterday, PIAA votes 25-5. And I asked the governor's office first what their reaction was. They came back and said, we've already told you what we think. We don't think you should be playing until the first of the year. So my fear is for the student athletes that are gearing up to play fall seasons, that if there's any number of outbreaks in schools, and this is going to happen, folks, you're putting people back together that have been other places in the country. They're bringing it with them, whether they know it or not. You're going to see a spike, and he and Secretary Levine are going to use that spike to close schools again, send everybody to remote learning. And if you're not going to school and you're doing the remote learning thing, sports are going to go with it. I may be completely wrong on that one, but just as history is my guide, I think that's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And, one of the things, and I don't know if you're ready to transition to the Myrtle Beach story, but one of the things I talk about in it all the time is how our leaders are able to cover up their failings by virtue signaling these empty platitudes. And so when Governor Tom Wolf talks about, there's 2 Pennsylvanias and he marches with Black Lives Matter, that's a convenient way to change the discussion from, why did you put COVID patients in nursing homes? It's easy. It's an easy transition. Oh, no. I'm fighting racism. And I don't think they realize that not only, one, does that prove that they lack leadership, but second, that it makes things worse, that you're actually causing division. In fact, it's not that they don't realize it, it's intentional. And so instead of looking and saying, look, yes, reality is different from different cultures and different areas, depending on all sorts of things, race, socioeconomic backgrounds, but we will strive to make this one Pennsylvania. What's wrong with that answer? Instead, it's playing to, of course, there's 2 Pennsylvanias, and that's how we have to treat the disease, by understanding that there's 2 Pennsylvanias. I think it's just a disaster. But are you ready to talk kind of about the the Myrtle Beach story?
We'll hear John in the background. He has some opinions that he wants to share.
Okay.
Too, but I'm joking. It's my
yeah. He'd probably sound better than me. So.
Well, I know he'd look much better than me. But.
So, Jason, I'm going to defer to you. I'm going to have a quick wardrobe change here for just a moment, as we kind of move on to another topic that I know a lot of people were waiting for our show this week to talk about. But Jason, I wanted to ask you first, having appeared on your show earlier this week, that I was very happy to do. It's not an unnamed podcast, by the way.
I know.
Here locally, as it was described. I wanted you to kind of take the lead on your podcast and the moves that you're making and the difference that you're making as well with the show.
Well, thank you, and I do think that our show is making a difference. And we were that unnamed podcast in the Sun-Gazette article. Proud of that. But our circulation is very strong, and we're getting our message across to a lot of people. I love the hat, by the way. We have taken on some very serious issues, and it's clearly demonstrated, as your show has as well, that there's a void in northeastern and central Pennsylvania. For people who are willing to take on tough issues, and that's what we try to do. And but obviously, this most recent program was focused on Todd, your recent situation that occurred at your property where your car was firebombed about 48 hours after what was a devastating story for the Williamsport School District. And I felt that it was important that the people of this area had an opportunity to, first off, to understand this issue and to know the facts about it. And also, what it basically did there was about 600 or 700 shares of my post where I do, by the way, Todd, my thoughts and prayers are with you and your family throughout this situation. But the fact that somebody speaking truth to power has to fear for their property and for their lives is just unacceptable to me.
Yeah, and if I could so if you're watching, you have to understand that Jason and Todd and Carlos, this story occurs in Williamsport. I'm not from Williamsport, so I was an outsider to this story as far as knowing exactly the characters that were in it. So let me just give a brief rundown of what's going on, and then Todd and Jason will be able to fill in the specifics and exactly what's going on. Basically, what you need to know from this story is it was 2 years ago at this point, correct, Todd? When the Myrtle Beach, 2 years ago, Williamsport baseball team, their high school baseball team, went to Myrtle Beach, as they do often, to compete in a baseball tournament. There, 2 kids were sexually assaulted by other members of the team. It was filmed. There's video of this. That film was then shared in an attempt to ridicule the victims of this sexual assault. And people that are mandated reporters of child safety reporters were aware, it seems, of this video and of what went on and the allegations. And instead of doing their due diligence and their legally mandated responsibility of reporting this to authorities, they've done everything they could to cover it up. And this goes, the particular names aren't important at this point. Todd will get them, but this goes from people that were, coaches or chaperones on the team, people that were involved in the school, such as, teachers, principals, school board people, all sorts of people implicated in this, including law enforcement officials in the area that didn't cooperate or weren't totally forthcoming with the Myrtle Beach law enforcement that was trying to investigate this. The story would have been buried if there wasn't one journalist, who is our friend Todd here, who decided to try to get justice for these victims and has been like a bulldog on this story for 2 years. And it's been a slow grind for him, but we're now starting to see results as the law enforcement, it's now switched to, I believe it's the AG in Pennsylvania, right, that's now handling this case.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Attorney General in Pennsylvania is now handling this case. And so what the story represents is kind of, it has everything. The corruption, the victims that suffered through this, and the fact that they couldn't get justice until a good reporter actually started to do the right thing. It shows how lacking we are of good reporters in this country at the local level as well. And that if we even have just a few, the positive changes that could make for people that suffer these injustices. It shows corruption from people that will virtue signal things like Black Lives Matter and there's systemic racism. They'll virtue signal that. But when it came to actually doing something in their real life to help protect the most underprivileged of us, children that are victims of sexual assaults, they stood by and did nothing, or worse, they actually helped cover up for it. And then the reason that we talk about this story a lot, but what occurred this week, I believe 4 a.m. Monday morning, is that correct, Todd?
Monday into Tuesday.
Yeah, was that Todd, who's reported on this story, his car was firebombed at his house where his family lives in his driveway. He was attacked because he, as a journalist, did what journalists are supposed to do, hold truth to power. And our system is so corrupt, even at local levels, that we see that someone trying to stand up to the powerful now has to face physical threats and intimidation and risk to his life. So that's why I thought it was important to really cover this story this week. And just to give you a general idea, that's the bare bones outline. The more specifics you get into it, the more disgusting and unbelievable this story becomes. But did I miss anything there, Todd or Jason?
Well, it was very well covered. And I mean, you mentioned the fact that, you're not from here. We are. My family's been here for 5 generations on my father's side, 6 with my children. And 9 generations with my children on my mother's side. And, it wasn't an easy thing. And I was not on this story early. Todd was the only one on it before I even realized that there was a there, which became very clear to me after I looked into it that there was. And I have not obviously faced the backlash that Todd has, where it's had, negative impacts on his business, et cetera, although there have been attempts to do that. But it's not easy to speak out on these things. It would have been much easier for me to continue to to do what I was doing, and for Todd and Carlos to continue doing what they're doing, both successful in their own right. And a lot of my friends, and the situation is that because of the fact that I've been here for a long time, and because of the fact that I run a successful business, I had a lot of people say, why are you talking about this thing, Jason? All it does is pisses people off at you, and you know, and you're going to create enemies for yourself, and it might hurt your business. You know, why are you doing it? Because I don't know how I would be able to look at my children
Right.
In the eye and tell them that, you know, yeah, their father was going to, you know, impact me negatively if I talked about this story. But you know what? To not talk about it is inexcusable. We need to have a conversation about it. And quite frankly, you know, if the school district would have followed the Williamsport School Board would have followed school board member Adam Welderoff's lead and voted for an outside investigation, I wouldn't be as critical of them, because they would at least be, you know, looking into their practices and their policies in a specific instance to see, you know, what went wrong. Because for them to say that this is okay, that this happened, which is basically what you're doing by not investigating it, just is unacceptable to me as a taxpayer, particularly when you consider the fact that, you know, in Lycoming County, if you're living in the city of Williamsport, you're paying huge city property taxes. Even though we have a dwindling tax base, you're paying huge school district taxes. I expected better from these people.
Right. And this isn't like a partisan political, or it's not personal axes to grind for you and Todd and Carlos, and certainly not myself, who doesn't even know these people. But just think of it.
I know one of the major people who are mentioned here. That's it, and that's the superintendent, Dr. Bowers. But I mean, and I don't know him well. I've only met him a handful of times, but I don't have any axes to grind with any of these people. In fact, some of them prior to this probably would have said they liked me and that they were my friends. They probably don't say that now, but you know, I don't have any axe to grind with the Williamsport School District. In fact, I'm looking forward to it getting cleaned up so that I can be proud of it again.
Right. Who would want to send their kids to it? Again, just at the most simple levels, where the society we live in today, where we know now, like, I have a lot of problems with the Me Too movement. I think that it's been weaponized and things like that. But there was a kernel of truth that was started on, and that is, we need to take sexual assault seriously, regardless of the gender, you know, the race, the ethnicity, whatever, of the victims or the perpetrator, regardless of their economic status. It needs to be taken seriously. And we live in a society which it seems to even go further than that. And now it just, you know, if you look, for example, with the Kavanaugh situation, he was guilty until proven innocent. That's not the way to swing the pendulum. That's too far. But certainly we need to take accusations seriously. How in that world can you, if you're on the school board in Williamsport, could you hear of these allegations and be like, well, we don't want to discuss this. We don't want an investigation into this. It's unforgivable. I don't know what they could be thinking. Now, am I saying that everyone that was involved in not wanting an investigation, did they personally, you know, have a connection to the people that engaged in this sexual assault? I'm not saying that. But you're tasked with protecting our children first and foremost. And if you're incapable of understanding that the mere allegation, and it's not just an allegation, as Todd will be able to tell us, there's actual proof and there's evidence coming out all the time that further vindicates that this happened. There were dozens of witnesses. I mean, this was a video that was placed online that captured the sexual assault. And yet still, people involved in that school district decided, we just want it to go away. Please just shut up, Todd. Please shut up, Jason. That, to me, as an outsider, I'm like, how would, you know, I have a kid coming in January. How could I send a kid to that school? If something happens to my kid, do I trust that the people that are tasked with, first and foremost, keeping my child safe, that they'll do the right thing? I don't think so.
I'm certainly not. I'm certainly not at all. I mean, two of my children are fortunate enough. Their mother and I are divorced, to go to Loyalsock School District, which I think is a great school district. But my youngest son, who you just heard earlier, I can't put him in the Williamsport School District. I'd love to, but you know, when he's old enough to go, not under the current leadership, because I just simply don't trust them to keep our children safe. And again, do I think that every member of the school board, as you said, Robert, acting maliciously? No, I think that they want to be in the cool kids club, as Todd Bartley says, and it's not cool to question those in power. You know, it doesn't go over well. So, you know, for whatever their reasons or whatever their motives, I don't think that everybody in this situation is motivated by trying to cover up sexual assault. Very many of them may, you know, not actually think that it happened. I don't know. You know, there's clear evidence that it did. But I think that the other person that we need to praise in this situation is our new district attorney, Ryan Gardner, who's done a wonderful job. I mean, just this week, he put 27 dangerous drug and gun dealers behind bars where they belong. And the fact that he said, look, I can't do an independent review of this because it's a local issue. I'm going to turn it over to the Attorney General. That move in and of itself showed a great deal of courage on the part of our District Attorney, Ryan Gardner, who I think is a true leader, not only on this issue, but it's looking for justice. And he's a guy who was not supported by the established order because, he sees justice as he sees his number one responsibility as district attorney to, administer justice. He's our top cop. And, I'm very proud to have to say that I supported him from day one, and I support him to this day. And, kudos to District Attorney Ryan Gardner for doing the right thing and turning this over to the Attorney General's office.
So, Jason, can you drill down on that just for a moment? Because his opponent in the primary was Nicole Ippolito. At the time was an assistant district attorney under Ken Ossico and had served under former district attorney Eric Lenhart, who is now a judge here in Lycoming County. Can you drill down on, why the establishment, or as I like to call it, the swamp here locally, backed Nicole Ippolito, and then if she would have won, where this case would have gone if she would have become the next district attorney instead of Ryan Gardner? What's your take on that?
I think that it certainly would have never been turned over. Frankly, if she would have supported turning it over, she would have done it when she was assistant district attorney, essentially, DA in waiting in everybody's mind. I mean, she was supposed to win the election, no problem, had the support of all the local establishment. I think the reason that the local establishment supported Nicole was because Nicole would have owed them something. Ryan Gardner doesn't owe him anything. He primarily self-financed his campaign, and he kept it on the issues. And he's not tied into that group. And he's not tied into any group. I mean, Ryan Gardner, quite frankly, if I did something wrong, as hard as it would believe that I would do that, Ryan would treat me the same as he treats everybody else. And I think that the reason they didn't support him is because he was not part of the good old boys or the swamp. I hate to say good old boys network because there's a lot of women in this network too. But, I think where it would have went, it would have went where it went for, the year and a half or so that it was on her watch, which is nowhere. It would have been shelved. It would have been put aside as would have a lot of other things that they're looking into now. It would have been. So it would have been, I think one of the best things that has happened to this county was his election.
So Todd,
so guys, let me give you a heads up on something real quick on the political side. One of the driving forces, my understanding is from doing all the research on this, one of the driving forces in the referral was the fact that Detective Willie Weber works for the district attorney, right? He was the chief detective at the time, worked on this case, okay? And then as District Attorney Gardner is considering this case being open at the time, is his office going to have it or is he going to have to refer it out? I think the straw that broke the camel's back was the involvement in this case by a local criminal defense attorney, George Lepley. Well, George Lepley gave a political contribution to Ryan Gardner's campaign for district attorney. So if there was ever going to be a case, an argument could have been made that there may have been a conflict of interest because one of your political donors, made a donation. You understand where I'm going? Are we all on the same page so far?
Yep.
With the understanding that may be a conflict of interest?
Absolutely.
Rob has agreed. Jason, do you concur?
Yes, I would agree with that. That there would be a perception of a conflict of interest there. Yes.
Okay. So now, after the referral, it's in the hands of the Attorney General. I continue to dig. I continue to do my reporting. And Part 19 that I just wrote here in recent weeks, just prior to the firebombing, a letter was discovered. Here's the letter. See? Lepley, Engelman, and Yaw, May 31st. There, to Brandon, to Sean, right? Ari, misconduct, Myrtle Beach. See, I do have the letter, okay? That letter, in my humble opinion, has been the straw that broke the camel's back. That letter from George Lepley was a threat to the school district that said, if you pursue my client and any type of punishment, I will unmask my paraphrase, okay, because the letter is redacted. However, I have information of what that letter contains, which I reported in Part 19. There will be unmasking of any number of people on that trip, including student athletes. And basically, if you treat the client any differently, this is my paraphrase, there's going to be hell to pay. And after that letter and its contents, its unredacted contents were published, and my information developed what's redacted in that letter, several days later, my car in my driveway was firebombed. There is no question it was a firebomb. And for those at the Williamsport Sun-Gazette newspaper and any local person that believes that I did this to myself and am trying to perpetuate a hoax, there are any number of mental health professionals I'd love to refer you to, because you have lost your minds. You have absolutely lost your minds. The Pennsylvania State Police are well into an investigation, and when it comes to a conclusion, the person and people associated with this terrorist act will be brought to justice.
Well, and as you say, to say that it's a hoax, and that's one of the number one phone calls that I got, as they told you, Todd, is, did you ever look into this? Why didn't you ask him this? If it was a hoax. Well, you need to ask quite a few questions here that because it's irrational to believe that. And for them to say that, it's because because they know that what this terrorist act has done is essentially took a public that was probably, 25 or 30% aware of the story, thanks to Todd, to now, I think there's nobody who doesn't know about the story. A lot of interest in your story now as a result of that. It demonstrated to most people that you don't firebomb somebody's car unless you have something to be afraid of. And it's not too hard to I'm not an investigator, but to put two and two together as a potential motive here. And again, I trust the state police to do a wonderful job. They're great. But I mean, to suggest that, to make that suggestion, that you did that, it to me is baseless and it's outrageous.
Okay.
And it's an effort to further silence you.
Right.
And I will say this, and then Rob, please follow up with a comment. I'm going to tell you right now, the local newspaper is trashed. They misquoted and mischaracterized any number of things. They did not print a quote that I provided Mike Ruther. And oh, by the way, did you notice the story that was in the paper? Nobody put their name on it. That's how brave they are. Okay. I sent him a quote and I said, I'll give you a quote when Bob Raleigh admits he's related. He's the publisher of the paper. When he admits he's family and related to Williamsport Area High School principal Brandon Pardo, and in the same article announces his resignation. You do that, I'll give you a quote.
Yeah, and I want to talk more about the Sun-Gazette and their coverage of the story of your car being firebombed. But real quick, let's go with this hoax things for a minute. Okay, so the reason that they would say that this is potentially a hoax is because you stand to gain, I guess, because you get notoriety or you get your name out there because this story will become more public. So let me ask you this. The risk of you potentially engaging in a hoax, this would be an incredible risk. Like, you literally could go to prison for many years for abusing law enforcement and the fire department's resources and potentially harming people through this hoax. Conversely, what did you stand to gain? Let me ask you this question. Is it your belief that your reporting has moved the needle on this and now investigators are actively looking in a way that's probably going to result in some convictions of some of these people in power that have covered up this story?
No question.
So why would you then? It's inevitable. It's going to come out, right? We know that. You know that better than anyone. Why would you risk that all? What would be your incentive be? This makes no sense whatsoever. And just like Jason was saying, the people that say this, these are people that want to remain willfully ignorant because they understand how corrupt this system is. So they're either the people that actively were involved in the corruption, or they're people that just want to turn a blind eye to it and say, I don't want to believe that our school district was capable of this. That's why their brain would go there. But it just logically would make no sense for you to risk everything that you've reported on painstakingly for 2 years. That's now seeing real results. Not that you firebombed your car when it was a tough slog and there weren't results, but now that things are proceeding at a rapid pace, all of a sudden you're going to jeopardize all of that. It takes a third grader to realize how stupid that accusation is.
I would agree with that. I mean, now I will say, in the interest of full disclosure, I do serve on a board with Bob Raleigh, and actually Bob's related to me. And, we may have a disagreement on Bob, but, the Sun-Gazette's, reporting of this has not been to the level that I think that it should be. I'm somebody who hopes that changes. But, again, I don't, I personally, just in the interest of full disclosure, Bob is on a board with me. All of my interactions with him have been positive. And he's actually a relative of mine as well. But you're seeing that doesn't really matter to me.
Right.
I don't really care.
I mean, Jason, I tell you what, I'll give you a lot of credit because you've given more full disclosure just now than Bob Rowley's done since 2018 becoming aware of this story. And I thank you for that.
Now, let's briefly explain, Todd. So you're one reporter, and you're working at Tuck Williamsport. There's only basically one other game in town when it comes to the Sun-Gazette, right, as a paper?
On a daily basis.
Yes.
And we're going to have to wait till Monday now because they only go 6 days a week instead of 7. But that's a story that you need to ask Bob and Laura about instead of me. That's their issue, not mine. And then there's the Patriot News out of Harrisburg that has not yet picked it up. I did have some TV folks reach out to me. I said, just wait. There's going to be an arrest. You want to carry anything, cover the arrest.
Right. Now, so the Sun-Gazette, which is there for the people of Williamsport, explain again the importance of this aspect. The editor for that paper has a strong connection to the principal. And for those of you, if you can't tell from this story, and if you'd like, Todd, you could talk exactly how Pardo is implicated in possible wrongdoing in this story. Can you explain why that's a tenuous relationship? Why the newspaper, the biggest newspaper in the area, is basically not criminally, that's not the word, but doing a disservice to the public by burying this story because of a personal relationship with someone that might be implicated in it?
Well, they're complicit in the cover-up.
Right.
Because they're not, by them actively not covering it to the level that they should. And they have resources like you couldn't even imagine, right? They've got a big building in the Pittsburgh area. I mean, they've got papers all over the place. This would be a simple story for them, but they're not covering it because of the family connection.
And so this was what struck me when I was talking to you last night. I knew this occurred Monday, but last night was the first night I got to talk to you specifically about it. The Sun-Gazette, so think about this, everyone that's listening, right? Imagine that a journalist who's reporting on a story of corruption at the highest levels at the local level, imagine that their vehicle is firebombed. What do you expect the coverage of that to look like? That's a serious, serious thing. That's jeopardizing not only Todd, but his family. So you would expect a fair journalist outlet that was covering that to treat it with the importance that it deserves and the seriousness that it deserves. Instead, the Sun-Gazette makes sure to include quotes that say, well, actually, the fire wasn't that bad. It wasn't that close to his house. What is the newsworthiness of that statement of saying how close the fire was to the house? Oh, so it's okay to firebomb someone's car as long as it's not close to their house? It's clear that they're attempting to downplay this to their audience because they don't want to show the severity and the seriousness of not only the accusations of what the original story was about, but the fact that the story they refused to cover, the journalist that did cover it, was then jeopardized by people that want him silenced.
Rob, Jason, if I may, I will give the assistant fire chief in Losac Township the benefit of the doubt that he was misquoted, because I'm here to tell you, 10 to 12 feet ain't even close.
And that's
okay.
Can
they
you say exactly
the car was 10 to 12 feet from the house?
What exactly did the Sun-Gazette? What was their quote?
And that the home was never in danger. If that's factually accurate, why were 4 different departments toned out to show up? Why? Because it was a fully involved automobile fire next to a structure. They were planning for the worst. Thankfully, because of some actions that my family and I took in the immediate moments after that, and the fire department having an immediate response at 4:00 in the morning, averted disaster. And by the way, if I may, the Losac Volunteer Fire Company is having their chicken barbecue today. Go support them, man, because they were here in a blink in great number with other departments as well, responding to the scene. Go support them.
Our local fire departments are wonderful. They do a great job. The old Lycoming Fire Department, Loyal Sac Volunteer Fire Department, the Williamsport Fire Department. And I mean, the fact that fire was put out, so quickly, obviously was, your response, and also the courageous response of all of those first responders who I have a tremendous amount of respect for. And yeah, I mean, I absolutely go to the chicken barbecue. I think, now that you mention it, I think I might too.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Todd. So we've gone over the story, but just your personal feelings on it. Go through what's Monday morning look like for you? You're presumably you're sleeping at 4 a.m. I hope you're not that much of a maniac that you were up working on a story at 4 a.m. What did you hear? How were you first made aware of the fire?
We heard this loud thump, like something hit the house. My wife said, "What was that?" I'm like, that was not normal. I mean, it literally woke us up out of bed. And I checked, something here at the house and said, well, there's this orange blink. I think it might be the garbage guy because it was garbage night. I thought that maybe the guy dropped the can or something, and looked out the bathroom window and saw the car was on fire.
Now, I know
your family's home at this time, which I think is.
Oh yeah. I mean, we started to take some steps, and it's in the police report, and I shared this with you. I mean, we took steps to move vehicles that were also in the driveway, and my son and daughter in the house, and they got the pets out. Everybody got out safely. But I'm telling you, there was a grave concern where that fire started that it was going to do significant damage.
Well, and not only that, but how do you know that was going to be the end of what they were doing?
Right.
It could, if someone's willing to go that far, maybe that was just step one. So the idea that I just keep going back, I cannot believe it enrages me. What happened to you and your family enrages me anyways. But the fact that that's how it would be covered. Oh, it wasn't that bad. The structure wasn't like that's unforgivable for a news outlet to spin this story that way. It just, and then do you really trust that they were accurately depicting, the greater story in the first place? The story of this sexual assault in the cover of course not. If that's how they're going to treat this. Now I know, just because I know you and I know that you're a fighter, but how's your family? Are they holding up all right after this?
Think about this for a minute. I want you to put this in perspective that, 4:00 in the morning. So now the adrenaline's going, and the wife's got to go to work at 7:15, 7:30. Okay. Kids have things they got to get done during the day. I got things I got to get done during the day. So as my wife's preparing to go to work at 7:15, 7:30, she goes, these people don't understand you very well, do they? If they thought they were going to rattle you or, shake your resolve, all they've done is bolstered your resolve to keep writing the story. So no, I'm not going to stop.
Good.
I'm not.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. And I think this is this is the first reaction I had when I first started talking with you and I first started hearing questions you were asking Secretary Levine and Tom Wolf over COVID was, what's your background? Are you a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist? Were you a journalist who specialized in corruption cases and stuff? Can you talk a little? You basically specialized in sports journalism, correct?
Yeah, I've been a play-by-play guy for a long time. I've done a couple of investigative reports, and I'll go back to the Bob Raleigh thing. The former athletic director at Lock Haven University sued me for defamation, was very unsuccessful at that, by the way, with a report that I had done on all of the deficiencies while she ran the athletic department that saw national championships in the softball program and a winless football program, right? And then a wrestling program that had been on the national stage and then fell off under her watch. Long story short, Bob Raleigh, as the publisher to Lock Haven Express at the time, turned a blind eye to that too, until the report came out that was so conflicted. Are you kidding me? The two of the investigators that came in, one of whom was handpicked by Sharon Taylor and sat on committees and boards with her for years and years and years, and you're letting that person run the investigation? Yeah, sham again. So I have not had use for Bob Raleigh for over a decade. Because if you're going to turn a blind eye to that, shocker you did with the Williamsport story, you can resign now.
Well, and Jason, see if this is something that when I hear this, like, I get amazed sometimes at the people we look at as professionals and expect to behave in a certain way, and their lack of integrity or their lack of ability to do their job. So, for example, when I, getting involved into the foray of politics, there's part of you that expects, when I meet the people that have been doing this for years, regardless if they agree or disagree with me, they're going to be these professionals that are very, they're very sharp and everything's, and then you meet some people are great, but you meet some of these people and you're like, oh my goodness, how have you been an elected official for 30 years? Like, you don't know the base level thing. Did you kind of have that feeling when it comes to journalism, both in this story and in like what I see you covering with the COVID story, that sometimes it seems like you're the only person in a room, you're sitting there with 100 colleagues, but no one wants to cover the difficult story. They all want to go along to get along. And does it kind of make you a little jaded at the profession of journalism?
It does, because, I have tremendous respect for people in the profession of journalism. And again, the Sun-Gazette's been fair to me over the years, and I think I've been fair to them. But, in this instance, obviously, I'm not particularly pleased with their coverage. But I'm constantly in shock and awe of the mediocrity of people. But I think a lot of it boils down to comfort. They want to be comfortable, and I understand that. And, going against the grain is not comfortable. It's not easy. It doesn't win you friends. And it's not the way to quickly rise up, unfortunately, in many of these vocations. However, I will say that there's light at the end of the tunnel, that at the end of the day, there was a local public official that I thought was quite a misbehavior, and he got, indicted and got into trouble. It comes around. But, I think that a lot of people see that the fast road to success is to cover with regard to the journal. And I don't count myself as a journalist. Todd certainly is. I do have a podcast that people listen to, and I certainly appreciate that. And from the bottom of my heart,
Pennsylvania Now, for those that are checking in that want to quote that, it's Pennsylvania Now, by the way.
Pennsylvania
it's not an
Now.
unnamed podcast.
Well, Pennsylvania Now, yeah. And we have 50,000, over 50,000 people that, can have an opportunity to watch or listen if they want to. And, we've done well with that. And it's simply been by, and again, I have not spent as much time on this story as Todd, but really what my goal is to just bring the truth to people and to call balls and strikes in some regards. And, I'm an opinionated guy and I give my opinion. But I think the difference is that when guys like us give our opinion, we let you know that that's opinion.
Right.
We don't try to say that. And again, I don't think that everybody that has an opinion can't also do journalistic work. But, a story like this, it would seem to me as a young kid who, was interested in media, and mine was radio. You want to be the guy who is the Todd Bartley who breaks the tough story, it would seem to me. But then I guess you get in there, and it has made me jaded, Robert, to answer your question. Yeah. Because, I guess I expect more from people.
Yeah. The same thing, Todd. Do you sometimes just lie awake at night wondering, like, wow, why am I the only one who is willing to speak up about this with all these people that are journalists that were aware of it?
I know why. That's fine. I'll keep that one to myself, but I know why. Yeah. And they know why too, why they're not doing certain things. I found it really, really rich that the counter narrative was there the day after the car bomb attempt, right? That there was a headline that read, "Proud to be the home of Little League World Series." Well, let's just see how that plays out.
Yeah.
Well,
because the Little League complex hosted this same team for their banquet in June of 2018. Let's just see how proud Little League International turns out to be once all the facts are out there.
Well, and I think too that, I look at it as an obligation to speak the truth. I teach my children that they need to fight for what they believe in, and that they need to stand up to bullies, and that they need to be true to themselves. What kind of an example would I be if I'm saying that? That's what my definition of virtue signaling is. If I'm virtue signaling that, if I'm saying that, and then I'm not doing it, what kind of an example am I setting? I guess it doesn't even, and maybe it's all of us are like this to some degree and that's why we've all come together. But I guess when I speak my mind and I do these things, I don't worry about the repercussions. But then again, I haven't had my car firebombed or anything like Todd had, but there have been things over the years, somebody defecated on my porch one time and that disagreed with me. Obviously, they probably didn't agree with me. That's some of you do, some of you agree with me, I guess.
I don't think it was a gift, right?
No, it wasn't a gift. It wasn't a gift. Look, that's in the past. But, I did, just to me, I don't know. I sleep better at night knowing that I'm true to my values. And I think that's, and I'm not, my values are simply that, the truth needs to be told and that it's the responsibility of those in power to protect the powerless and to be a voice for the voiceless. I don't, why else would you get involved in politics unless you wanted to make people's lives better? Why else would you get involved in journalism unless you wanted the truth to be told?
Go ahead, Todd.
Todd?
Yeah, that was my whole premise of this whole thing. I've been asked this, any number of times. Why'd you get involved in this case? I said, number one, the victim was not believed at all, even though there was a video, right? How do you don't believe that and there's a video? And they were marginalized and they wanted somebody to tell their story. And I feel humbled, very fortunate that they entrusted me with telling their story. And to come across this letter, May 31st of 2018, it was dated, from George Lepley to Brandon Pardo and Sean McCann. It puts the entire story now in context. It's why they did certain things, right, and handled it a certain way. It's just pitiful. It is beyond pitiful how they treated this family. And if you think the criminal side is going to be bad, it is. When Klein and Spector, who are representing John Doe 1 and the family, get done with this area, for those that are watching, you can see the look on my face. It's going to be a stunning number. A stunning number.
And we taxpayers are going to have to pay for the mistakes they made. And the thing is, I want to say too to Todd, this has not benefited Todd's career. This hasn't helped him financially to be standing up. I can kind of say these things, from my porch on Penn Street because, this hasn't impacted my business. In fact, I said only half jokingly the other day on Pennsylvania Now, it seems like the more controversial I am, the better business is. Right. People know they speak your mind, but Todd, this is hurt Todd. If Todd wanted to take the easy route out, he is by far the most talented journalist in this area. One of the most talented journalists, in my opinion, in the country. Yep. And the courage that he has demonstrated and the personal sacrifices that he has made, still why, by the way, doing what he can to provide for his family and keep a roof over their head when the local community wouldn't support him. That to me is courage. And so Todd, you've demonstrated that, and I don't think you get the credit you deserve on that very often. It's really easy for me to speak my mind. I've always done it, and it's kind of my brand, and it's helped me professionally. But this isn't a brand for Todd Barr. This isn't help. At the end of the day, you're going to get to see the rewards of it, in that you can look your kids in the eye and that you can be right with your God. And also, I think you're going to, you revealed this story. I think your career prospects are looking pretty damn good. I think you're going to be able to do whatever you want to do, but you didn't do it for that reason. And you didn't take the easy way. And I admire that. I really do, man.
Well, yeah. And going along
with that. And I want to say that publicly.
Yeah.
I want to say that publicly. I don't want to equivoc.
Completely agree. And going along with what both of you were saying here, look, if you're religious or not, at the end of the day, your judge, your harshest critic should be yourself and your God, right?
Exactly.
That's, you lay down in bed at the end of the day. Can you look at yourself in the mirror? Can you sleep at night because you're comfortable you did the right thing? It is so easy to say and do the right thing when it benefits you. When it's easy, you keep traveling down that road, no problem. But when there's personal risk involved to you, whether risk your reputation, to relationships, to your business, that's when it matters. And this is analogous to politics in general. How many, let's just say it, like, I'm critical of Republicans as well. How many Republicans are easy to talk about being fiscal conservatives, for example, when they're not the party in power? Oh, Obama, how dare you spend so much money? But once it's difficult for them, okay, now you're in charge. Now go ahead. Let's see what you have to say. Well, now it's more difficult, and all of a sudden they're meek as mice, right? It's the same with who was out there. How many politicians were willing to defend this country as not systemically racist and horrible? Where were they? It's easy to be patriotic when you're not going to be attacked when you don't have to worry about mobs or, cancel culture coming after you. But when the chips are down, who's there with you? I'm sure that Jason and Todd would agree with me. I make mistakes every day of my life. I really do. But I try to hold myself to the standard of, I'm going to say what I think's right. And if I'm wrong, so be it. But I'm not going to let it influence me. Well, this might have implications on my financial aspects if I say this, so I won't. Or it might hurt a potential political career of mine in the future if I say this, so I won't. I don't care. If it's right, it's right. If I happen to be wrong, so be it. That's what I respect so much about Todd, because it's easy now. This idea that possibly you firebombed your own car because it would benefit you personally. Do people not understand the hours you put into this story when no one would touch it? When all you had was something to lose? You had no idea that this would eventually be taken by the Pennsylvania AG. The story could have went nowhere, and your name could have been mud in the town, and you could have lost your business or lost people listening to you because they thought that you were just someone that was, trying to denigrate people that were decent people in the town. And you could have stood to lose, but that didn't stop you because you knew that you were doing the right thing. And that's what I respect. And if it ends up, justice does end up being served, which is the most important thing. And if it ends up helping you as a career because people see, here's a journalist who cares, that's just secondary. That's great. It's great that all that stuff happened. But what matters as individuals is you did the right thing when it was difficult. And not many people could say that. And so that's why I'm proud to do the show with you. And I'm really proud of your reporting on it.
Fitzy, you could probably speak the most to this and with great certainty on this. And Rob mentioned it. Yeah, the business is gone. It was taken from me. Revenues plummeted as this story began to get into the real meat and this letter. I mean, people were running for the hills, right? I mean, a lot of people talk about, steak and sizzle, and there's no steak there, but there sure is a lot of sizzle. There's some significant steak to this story, okay? Significant for a lot of people. And that's why the car bomb happens. But like I said, with Fitz, I mean, you watched it firsthand, man. You were doing a show with us, and then the next thing you know, things are starting to fall apart and go sideways, and then you just sprinkle COVID in there too. It was just an absolute disaster.
And when you were in a position, Todd, where you were under pressure, and you gave me that opportunity to come onto that show and to, for the first time, really have an opportunity. I was used to spending the whole other part of my career, the whole first part of my career, espousing other people's views and getting those out to the public. But when you gave me that opportunity, I don't forget that. I had an opportunity that, to directly communicate with people and communicate my views. And I think a lot of people got to know me that thought they knew me through that program. And, people that I've become friends with and that now understand my perspective. And, that's what local journalism is supposed to be about. And I think that it's unfortunate that station's no longer on the air. But, we're going to be coming back with a bigger and even better platform. And, if you look at the things that we're doing, your show is getting a tremendous amount of attention. I mean, you've had on, key members of the legislature in Harrisburg, not just members from our own backyard. And by the way, we have a great state senator here in Gene Hall. And he's a good guy, but, getting people other than just, your regional folks on the show, between your program and my program, we've had key voices from both the Republican and Democratic caucus on important issues from a regional perspective. And I think that's pretty cool. There's nowhere else you can do that, and I know what we're talking about is launching this platform, that involves all of us on here and figuring out what that is. But, Robert, on, the national issues, man, I hear you speak, and I other than Pat Buchanan, I don't find myself shaking my head in agreement so much. And it's just the soul that you talk about working people, man, and then that's who I care. And that you can be I come from a Union Democratic family. I'm the first Republican on my dad's side, but I absolutely am proud of the fact to say today that I'm a Republican to people. It used to be something, that my dad's friends most of whom are Democrats, a lot of who voted for Trump last time, almost all of them are voting for him this time. I'd say I was a Republican. Oh, you're the party of the rich. Yeah, we're not anymore.
That's right. That's right. And just something Jason was saying there, Todd, let me just ask you so you can clarify for people listening. By no means, in my knowing of you, have you approached this in I'm going to use my show as a bully pulpit, or I'm going to use my website and reporting as a bully pulpit. You have issued, and I believe still have, a standing invitation to the people involved in this story that they could come on and discuss this and give their side anytime. Is that not correct?
Absolutely. Whenever you want to. They have my phone number. They have any number of ways to reaching out to me other than a car bomb. But they're more than welcome to, have a conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's so important. Like, understand this. Like, in general, when we're talking about politics, one of the things I'm proud with Jason and everyone on the channel, Carlos and Todd, we'll have people of differing point of views on all the time, right? We don't mind. Now, it's usually harder to get someone from the other side because they perceive us as conservative, which is true. We don't hide what our opinions are. But I think we ask tough questions of conservatives, and we certainly would give anyone who disagrees with us a fair shot. And in this story in particular, that's one of the things that's so telling. Doesn't it always seem like the people that have something to hide, they don't have much to say then when other people are like, well, here's the story. They'll rant and rave, and they'll go on social media, and they'll talk to people in the town and say, this isn't right. They're smearing me. You have your opportunity to come on and say your piece. You'll have plenty of time to come on and discuss whatever you want, but you choose not to. Instead, you choose to smear, deflect, ignore, and all of those things. And anyone who's listening, that should be a telltale sign to you of which side's interested in getting to the truth and which side's interested in covering it up.
If I may, and again, the Sun-Gazette has yet to show up in the room at Pima when the governor or secretary of health are there since the pandemic began, I might add. They barely ask any questions in the virtual platform, but be that as it may, being in that room with the governor, with the secretary, with multiple members of the cabinet, with, chief counsel to the governor, and asking questions. Gentlemen, if I could posit an idea with you, if I was asking inappropriate questions or playing the role, if I may, of Jim Acosta being, a foil to the governor or a foil to Secretary Levine, my credential would not be renewed each and every time we go. And it is because they know they're going to get significant questions, significantly challenged, pushed back upon with their numbers and their non-existent granular data. They know that's coming. I think that's good for our state.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And in fact, in your general life, because you should always be thinking the most important thing is your personal actions, your personal responsibility. If I could just suggest something that's been so effective to me, I love having people as my friends that disagree with me. There's nothing better for your own personal life and disbeliefs. You don't want people to, be attacking you and things, but people that you could trust will in good faith say, wait a minute, I'm going to push back on someone. That's great. That sharpens you as a person. Todd, you're doing what journalism's supposed to be. Someone in a position of power says something and you say, okay, here's some difficult questions. You don't do it in a way where you're yelling and screaming or, you're accusing people of being immoral. You just ask difficult questions. And if you're Republican, Democrat, if you're not involved in either party, you should be thankful that we have a good journalist like Todd out there that's willing to ask questions. And one of the things that blew my mind is you were telling a story one time of kind of pushing back. I believe it was on you asking Governor Wolf whether or not he felt that him marching with Black Lives Matter violated his social distancing ordinance. And you said, I believe that was the time, that basically the other journalists in the poll were giddy, oh, I can't believe he asked that. But it wasn't they were mad at you. It was more like they were implicitly saying, well, I can't ask that, but I'm glad someone did. Is that sort of some of the feeling you get sometimes when it comes to those type of stories?
Yeah, there was that one. And then recently when this whole idea of pro sports teams not being allowed to play in the state and the pushback on that. I mean, here's a great one. And then we'll get final statements from everybody. The funniest one is the Toronto Blue Jays couldn't come to Pittsburgh because the appearance of another team from another city, above and beyond whoever the Pirates are going to play, was going to cause a major outbreak in the city of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, right? So I asked Secretary Levine, well, Toronto's had 15,000 cases, I think was at the time. The Miami Marlins came to Philadelphia. out of Miami-Dade County, which is like one of the leading hotspots in the world for COVID cases. They have an outbreak in Philly. They cancel the series, right? So I use those numbers and real granular data. And as I'm giving the numbers and pushing back on Secretary Levine and asking this question, all of the journalists that I can see, let alone the ones behind me, are looking at me like, are you really doing this right now? Yes. Then they tried to claim credit. The administration claimed credit for the Blue Jays not coming to Pittsburgh for the lack of an outbreak. And I'm going, excuse me. If they were never there, you can't claim it as a victory, right? Because you don't know if they would have or they didn't. But by the way, and this is going to bring us to final statements, I said in an ironic twist of fate, the Pittsburgh Penguins are playing the Montreal Canadiens in Toronto.
Yeah. Didn't last long, but.
Yeah. Oh, thanks a lot. Really appreciate that. And now the Canadians are knocked out too, so it makes it doubly worse. That's great. Thanks. Really appreciate bringing that up on a Saturday after the week I've had. I really, with friends like you in my life, right? Fitzy, who needs enemies, right? With people like Rob Norton and Carlos.
You guys are all good friends.
So that said, with a final statement for the week and kind of a final thought, and then the look ahead at the convention coming up this week. Jason, first to you, just kind of a final thought, and then maybe if you want to tease your next Pennsylvania Now show as well.
Yeah, well, I'd love to. Thank you. And I just want to say that, we brought up a lot of concerns about our country and our community here today, but I think it's important to understand here in our community, there's a lot of good things that are happening. It's a beautiful region. We're lucky to be here. It's safe. It's even safer now that District Attorney Ryan Gardner took a bunch of bad people off the streets. But, the future is bright here. But the path to get there is going to be tough. There's going to be some cleansing, both in our country and in our region, and we just got to look forward to that. And as far as the convention, I look forward to hearing it. Pennsylvania Now, we have great guests on from time to time. I'm not. I generally decide that on Monday morning. Sometimes I even decide it on Tuesday who my guest is going to be, because sometimes it's in response, as it was last week with you, Todd, to the news. We had another guest scheduled, Ashley Peckage from Pittsburgh, involved in the Maxim, competition and other things in Pennsylvania. And then, we're going to be talking to some legislators here in a couple of weeks. But no, I usually decide that Monday or Tuesday morning who the guest is going to be. But we have a couple people, that are under the understanding that I might call them and say, hey, you want to come on the show?
Yeah.
Rob?
Okay, well, thanks. First, let me just say, currently in our format right now, we don't have advertisers. So if I could take a minute to plug us, please check out Jason Fitzgerald's podcast. Where can we find that? That's Pennsylvania Now, correct? What platforms can we find that on, Jason?
You can find it on my Facebook page, just like Pennsylvania Now, and we put them right up there. And they're also on northcentralpa.com.
Okay, and Todd, in addition to doing this, Todd also has a website that's talkwilliamsport.com. And that's where you could, if you're interested in this Myrtle Beach story, which I don't care your politics, left or right, voting for Trump or for Biden. Obviously, don't vote for Biden. But no, seriously, though, it's a story that should shock and interest everyone to see how this sort of corruption could happen when you have various levels that are kind of failing in their duties to protect our children. So please check out talkwilliamsport.com. And there's all sorts of great news on there that I say this in all sincerity. I think Todd's the best journalist that I've ever personally met, and certainly the best one asking difficult questions of our Pennsylvania governor. You can find me at Normal America with Rob Noor. I'm on YouTube. You can find me there. Normal America on DLive.tv. And Normal America with Rob Noor on Twitch.tv. Also, I recently switched careers and I'm now selling life insurance. So if you need life insurance, give me a holler. But to talk about what kind of my final thoughts on this week. Like, I just want to say, Todd, I'm really proud of you. And, I'm sorry that you and your family had to go through that with the firebombing. It's disgusting. I'm glad to know people that are standing up for people that injustices occurred to. This is above and beyond political partisanship. It's something that you're, particularly if you're listening and you're in Williamsport, please don't take our word for it. Read the stories that's on talkwilliamsport.com. Start asking questions. Start talking with your neighbors. Are you comfortable in knowing, even if you say, well, wait a minute, I haven't seen the video, I don't know of all of this proof. Are you comfortable knowing that these serious allegations were out there and that your local media, other than Todd and people involved in your school board, sought to cover it up? This is beyond politics. This is about keeping our community safe. And I frequent Williamsport a lot. It's one of my favorite places to go. It's a beautiful place. It's got such a rich history, and there's great people I know there. So I think that the arrow is pointing up in places like Williamsport and rural Pennsylvania in general. But we have to do our part to make sure that when we see corruption, we speak out against it. Referring to kind of what's going on nationally, politically, I'm interested to see what occurs at the RNC convention. I think that the message that should be pushed, and I'm hoping that's being pushed, is one of what can we do to help average everyday Americans of all skin colors, of all genders. That's what I'm interested in hearing. I'm sick and tired of being divided by my race or by my geographic location or things like that. We are all Americans. I want a party that's going to stick up for Americans and our economic viability. And I hope that they also correctly point out how the other side, the Democratic Party, is not only facilitating this division, but it's leading to real world violence that we see occurring on the streets every day. I hope they point those things out, and I'll be interested to see it. So thanks so much. Have a good week, everyone.
Rob, Fitzy, thank you so much for being here today. Carlos is on a very special assignment today. Yeah, Fitzy, go ahead.
I just said thank you, guys.
Thanks.
I have nothing else to say.
Yeah, so hang out for me for just a second here on my final thought for the week here. I want you guys to know something. My family handled this like the champions that they are, with a cowardly terrorist act in our driveway. You're not going to scare any of us. You're not going to stop any of us. I'm going to keep writing. We're going to bring this story to a conclusion, which I think everybody knows where it's going, which is why a car gets firebombed. But I'll leave that to state police. And it sounds like there's an arrest in the very near future that's going to be forthcoming. To the first responders that showed up from all over the area, Loyalsock, Williamsport, South, Montoursville, you folks are putting it on the line each and every day to keep us safe and put yourselves in harm's way, to run into buildings and get yourself next to cars that are on fire. Can't thank you guys enough. Show your support today to the Loyalsock Volunteer Fire Company. They're having their chicken barbecue all day today. I think it's $10 for a great meal. And like Fitzy said, I'll probably be going over there after a while, and he'll probably be heading that way too. If we could FedEx it to Rob, or when he comes back into town, we'll probably save one for Rob too.
You can't go wrong with the Loyalsock Township chicken barbecue.
Yeah, it's right there on Northway Road, just past the Golden Strip. You can't miss it. I mean, when you see the smoke billowing out of the grill right next to the fire company, and you can smell it for miles around, it's good stuff. But I want you guys to know something about the Myrtle Beach story. Don't allow this car bombing to be the distraction. That's what they want. Those that perpetrated this want you to pay attention to a car bombing and don't look over there at the story. No, look over there. Read the story. Read part 19. Go back to part 13, where Brandon Pardo's having a conversation with the detective in Myrtle Beach and fails to tell the detective he was on the trip, he ran the investigation, knows everything about it, instead deferred to Detective Weber. Read it, listen to it, go back. If you have questions, my email is on there. You can reach out to me on any of the platforms. What's coming up this week? Of course, we've talked about the conventions coming up. There'll be more arrests, as District Attorney Ryan Gardner said, and U.S. Attorney David Freed said of the federal arrests. They found 3 of the 6 warrants that were issued. They took 3 of those people into custody at the federal level. They have 3 more and potentially more than that, taking these folks off the street. So watch for that. And there's probably going to be a very special announcement that we'll be able to make on next Saturday's show if everything goes well. Jason's kind of hinted at it. Rob's kind of hinted at it. I know Carlos has kind of hinted at it on a platform and going to the next level with this show and some other things we have in the works to go forward with. That doesn't happen without your support. And for all those that reached out to me, my family, my wife, my kids, in the immediate hours and days after the firebombing of the vehicle, I just can't thank you guys enough. The call to action starts today with, getting the chicken barbecue going at the Volunteer Fire Company here in Loyalsock. and then your call to action to take some significant steps to move this community forward. They will be forthcoming in the days and weeks and months ahead. Again, thanks so much to Fitzy for being here today. Thanks for the appearance on your show, Rob. Have a great rest of your Saturday. And until next Saturday, this is Pennsylvania Patriots Radio and Pushback. Enjoy the rest of your